endowed with the gift of ancient storytelling. Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche knows what is at stake and what to do about it. She's fearless, or she would not have taken on the intimidating horror of Nigeria's civil war. Adiche came almost fully made. That's Adiche. And of course, this week, on the 21st, will be 1 year since Adiche went to the ancestors. So it's very interesting that it's almost like the ancestors were telling us to have this film shown today. And that's that was very telling.
Yeah,
I don't know if you feel.
I think the ancestors were telling us that, yes. And you know what you read, I could easily have recited it for you because I've memorized it. It's the most meaningful thing, the thing that has the most emotional resonance for me that anybody said about the book. Chinua Achebe is my hero.
He's spot on, very much spot on. And just point of information, that there are 2 mics on either aisle. Please get ready to ask questions. And we're going to have the book signing after this presentation. So, how are you involved in I know that you didn't do the screenplay, it was adapted, but was there much more involvement with the filmmaking?
No. I wasn't involved. I really wasn't involved at all. And I chose not to be.
Because it's your child.
That's my baby. And I think when you make a film from a book, it's like, I like to say it's like cutting up your baby. Because not everything in the book can go in a film. There's just no way that that's possible, especially with a book like this. And so I thought of it as not wanting to be involved in the cutting up of my baby, but also trusting that my baby would be cut up in the best possible way. Because B. Mandela was doing it.
Yeah. And he did a great job.
Yes, I think he did.
And actually, even the dialogue was straight out of the book. The most poignant dialogue was straight out of the book.
Yes.
Yeah, so I thought it was fantastic. This book, by the way, also won the National Book Critics Circle Award. And also, we just congratulate you for winning.
No, it didn't win. It was nominated. That's the book that won.
Americana. Yeah, it's nominated, but also critically acclaimed. Congratulations. That was 2 days ago. And I think we have a question. Somebody lined up with.
Chimamanda, you do so much, so well. It's very difficult to even bring it all together in a question. But if it has to be a question, then my question is, there's so much pain and humanness in these stories, in these African stories. This is the setting is Biafra, but it could be Eritrea and Ethiopia. It could be anywhere. And so how do you tackle such a complicated and pain-filled history and bring it together in characters and storytelling? That must be extremely difficult to process.
Thank you, by the way, for that kind statement. I don't know, I think what I keep in mind is that it's about human beings. And that I think ours is largely a culture that doesn't honor our dead and doesn't humanize our dead. And I want my fiction to do that. And I think the way to do that is to remember that at the end, in the middle of all of these things, it's human beings. When I was writing the novel, I tried to read everything that had been written about that period, and I looked at archives, I listened to the music, I really immersed myself in the facts. But I wanted the novel to be about the truths. And so the novel is really about the stories that people told me. I didn't use very much from the books I read. I used a lot from the stories I heard. And I wanted it to be about human beings. And when I had done so much research, took so much of my time, and I'd read so many boring, long books, and I was very tempted to use everything I had found out in the novel. So the first draft was huge, because I just kept thinking, that's so interesting, I have to put it in the book, I have to put it. And at the end, I realized the novel has to be about people. So really, I found myself removing many of the big facts, because I think the person who reads that novel and wants to find out more can go read the history. And I wanted it to be about people's stories. So almost every story in that novel is based on something real that somebody told me about. And I think that's really, I think it's important that we remember periods of war and strife in that way. I mean, what's going on today in Nigeria, where in some ways, you could make a case for it being another kind of civil war in northern Nigeria. And we talk about the numbers of the dead as though they have no faces and no dreams and no hopes. And there's something about it that's very...
And you bring it up in the book, in the words of when Richard is showing the American correspondence about how African lives, whenever they report it in the papers, it takes about 100 lives to one European life.
Yeah.
And that's very valid, especially in the line of work that we do. It's always like interesting to get people to care about African lives, about the stories, their lives, their careers. What were they doing?
Yeah.
We'll have a question from the side.
Thank you again. Tears, joy, also laughter in the movie. It was a lot going on. It was a rich story. I see this as a post-colonial story, and I really appreciate your talks and discussions about the danger of a single story. But there's a possibility when people walk away that they don't necessarily see a bigger post-colonial story of a diverse nation trying to struggle with a new national identity, and they see an African tragedy. And I don't know how comparatively we're able to promote the fact that these are struggles, as diverse as they may be, that countries that are trying to bring diverse groups of people together may experience, and not walk away seeing a destructed Africa or some type of a environment that's a little bit failing to keep up with some of the contemporary countries that have had a longer time to develop as a nation. How do we try to make sure that people walking away or those who are consuming this are seeing a bigger story of post-colonial struggle or diversity trying to gel?
I think the response to that, the only response really, is to tell your story the best way you can, and to hope and imagine that your viewers and your readers are humane and intelligent. Because I can't, and in my storytelling, and I think this is also B's approach to the film, is that we don't start off thinking about what that person will say. You tell your story, you tell the truth of your story. I do understand the concern, and I understand the question and where it comes from, but there's a part of me that wants to push back a little and challenge that, because we've taken on a certain kind of defensiveness, because we come from a part of the world that has so long been misunderstood, and so long been our stories have so long been told by other people, that there's a tendency for us to be overly defensive. I don't need somebody else who's not from Africa to validate the humanity of my character. We don't have to. If somebody watches this film and is unable to see how in the end it's about a human tragedy, it's about a large society that's trying to find itself, it's about so many things that can be reduced to one more African tragedy, then it's a failure on the part of the person. It's not the failure of the story. It's the smallness of the person's imagination, sorry to say, but and I'm not going to spend my time worrying about people with small imaginations. But it reminds me of this quote that I like very much from W.E.B. Du Bois, who said, and I'm going to misquote it a little, they have so emphasized our bad points that we now pretend that we don't have any bad points at all. And there's something about it that's also dehumanizing. If we constantly think we have to find ways to make sure that they don't think it's just enough, we have to make sure, and I'm just thinking, no, all we have to do is tell our story the best way we can.
There's another question from that side.
My name is Ngozi KG. Thank you, Mr. Manda, for this wonderful. You have actually made me cry so much because it reminds me. I was in the war. I was a little kid in the war, and it just reminded me of a lot of things that I experienced as a little kid. Actually, one of my cousins got married, and the same thing that happened to that young lady during her reception happened to my cousin, and there was an air raid, and people were killed during her wedding. And then 3 weeks after, her husband, who was a soldier, was killed in the war. And she went to England, and she has never been back to Nigeria. I have not set eyes on her. So this is the story of, this is our story. This is the story of what happened to us during the war. And I really do appreciate it. I was having nightmares for a long time. Even in the US, I still have nightmares when those bombs started falling. And we had to, everything that happened in that movie happened to me and my parents. And so this is something we should learn from. War, it should be the absolute last resort. I mean, it's more of a comment. I don't really have questions. I just want to thank you. I just want to let you know that I really, really do appreciate this, and you really did make me cry.
Thank you. I'm so happy I made you cry. Do we have another question from this side?
Yes, hi. Hi, Chimamanda. I wanted to say well done, first of all, for the book, which I read and I loved. And also well done for making sure that the movie was done. At least the right people did the movie. So it was well done. So well done. Now I have a question. How did you avoid being defined by a single story? I mean, going from Half of a Yellow Sun to Americana, you know, it's completely, I would say, different audiences, different type of story. And I don't know, I just put myself in the place of your publisher. If you were pitching that idea to me, I would say, isn't there some other periodic piece you could write? I'm just wondering how you did that.
Right, I think, well, I suppose I realized that I'm sure that there are many readers who expected that my next book would be Half of a Yellow Sun Part 2. And you know, my approach...
Is it coming?
you know, I can't tell you how many angry emails I have received from Nigerians in particular about the ending of Half of a Yellow Sun. But no, I think in general, because my approach is not, first of all, because I start with very low expectations. When I wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, I didn't think anybody would read it in particular. I didn't think it would do well, particularly, because it wasn't, as one very kind editor said to me, sexy. She said Darfur was sexy. So if you were going to do an African tragedy, maybe Darfur would work. And seeing as I didn't want to do Darfur, and so my approach has never been to try and imagine how the book is going to be received. And so because of that, I follow my passion. I follow what my interests are. I wrote Half of a Yellow Sun because it was very personal for me. I wanted to explore this history of my family, my country, and with Americana, it just happened to be what I was interested in. It happened to be the next thing I wanted to explore creatively, and also it started off with very low expectations because I didn't get much encouragement from many places. I won't say exactly where, but so no, it's really about that. I'm very keen to follow my passion, and if it means that somebody doesn't want to publish it, then I'll find someone else to publish it. It's just important for me to be creatively true to myself.
Take another question from...
Okay. Hi, Chimamanda. Thank you so much for the book and the movie and everything. You've encouraged so many people, so many young people from Nigeria, and writing is always something I wanted to do, but my parents just thought, this is not something that you should do. You should be a doctor, and so I became a doctor, but now I'm like, I wish I did writing. Anyways,
it's not too late.
It's too late for me. I'm still crying. I wanted to talk about the education system in Nigeria, because I have a sister who is 6, and she had math homework. And it was like John and James spent £6, and she was like, Farida, I don't understand this. I'm just like, she just, because for her it didn't make any sense. So what are your thoughts on education system in Nigeria? And also, as far as tribalism in Nigeria, do you ever think that one day we're going to get past you being Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, or whatever in Nigeria? Do you think in the near future that's something that might happen?
Okay, two very unconnected questions. The education bit I can go on forever, but I'll make it very short and say that I think we have a massive problem with education in Nigeria. I think what's happened in the past 20 years is that our public education system has failed, and now everything is. Parents understandably are looking for decent educations for their children. The people who provide private education have somehow conflated a good education with somehow an un-Nigerian education. And so last year I went around schools in Lagos just to see what was going on, and I was just startled by how all of the good schools would very boastfully say, we teach the British curriculum. And then I would think, but how are you preparing the children for life in Nigeria then? And so they would, in their assignments, they would have people paying for things in British pounds and talking about the British National Health Service. And it just seemed to me, and you know, extensive knowledge is a very good thing, but if you're raising children ostensibly to live in a particular country and you're not preparing them for life in that country, there's something very problematic about that. And then in the government schools that I visited, I noticed that the teachers were trying their best, but they didn't have resources, and there was just a failure on both sides, I thought. I don't know, I have so many ideas. I think we should massively overhaul the education system, massively overhaul all the what's in the curriculum, because even that is problematic in so many ways. And I'm just hoping that some brave people will come together and start a school that is proudly Nigerian, that teaches children what it's like to live Nigerian lives. I was fortunate to go to a very good secondary school in Osaka, the University Secondary School. And it was a school in which one got a good education, but it also prepared you for life in Nigeria. We studied about things in Naira, not pounds. Right? And then if you wanted to read about pounds, you go read it somewhere else. Which, you know, it's not that it's not a good idea to know about the world, but it's just that we can't pretend somehow that our world is not worthy of an education in which we prepare students to live in that world.
The second part of the question about outside.
The second part, you know, the question of, you know, when you say, do I think we'll get over being Hausa, being Yoruba, being Igbo, I don't think there's, the premise of that question, there's nothing wrong with being Hausa and Yoruba and Igbo. I think what I'm interested in is how we can stop politicizing ethnicity. I'm very interested in different cultures. I'm very proud of what I've learned about Igbo culture, and I'm very heartbroken about how much we've lost in terms of poetry and literature and mythology and religion, you know, in the way that people are going around sort of burning shrines. And what they're doing is they're burning history, and that breaks my heart. I'm also interested in just the wonderful history of the Benin Kingdom. I'm interested in the Oyo Kingdom. I'm interested in our cultures. I think we should all be. But the problem, of course, is that we've politicized ethnicity. And I feel that maybe the way to talk about it is not to say that we have to get over being Yoruba and Igbo. It's to say we have to see it differently. We have to see it as a cultural thing, not as a political thing. We need to stop saying we want a president from the South, or we want to, you know, we need to stop saying that. We need to start saying we want the best president, the best person wherever he may come from, right? And then also really, I just think we should learn more about our culture. There's so much there's just something sad about it, I think. I like to tell the story of how I went to Japan and I paid money to go and see the Shinto shrines. And I remember looking at those shrines thinking, actually, we have those things in eastern Nigeria, but we're burning them in the name of modernizing, while this country is making money from tourism by having people sharing the story of their past. You know, so.
We have another question from you.
Hi, Chimamanda, I just, first of all, just want to congratulate you for this excellent book that you wrote. In many ways, for many of us, I mean, the war was before my time, so it was quite interesting, you know, being from another part of Africa and learning about the things that happened during the Biafran War, and then going on to read more about it and learning that, you know, even though we come from such a huge continent, there's so much that is so common in the stories that we have. I come from Zimbabwe, so learning reading your book, and after I read your book, I also went on to read There Was a Country, and a lot of the stuff that Chinua spoke about, were things that, I was like, oh, so they went through the same things that we are also going through, like the indigenization stuff, and the, we had a small ethnic war also as well. So I wanted to, first of all, congratulate you on your book. The second thing, my question was about the healing from the war. That how do you see the healing from the Biafran war in present-day Nigeria? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question of healing is, when I was working on this novel, many people told me not to because Biafra was something we just pretended hadn't happened. And if anything, I think that since this novel has come out, that there's much more of a conversation going on about that part of our history, particularly among the generation of Nigerians who were very vague about what had happened. Even in school, we don't really learn anything about it. We kind of know a war happened, but it's very vague. And I think now what's happening is that there's more of a conversation. And it's still very much a contested part of our history, as it should be. And it's fairly recent. I mean, the war ended in 1970. That's not that long ago. But I had hope that we're able to talk about it. And on a rather personal level, when my Nigerian publisher told me that he got many, many orders for half of the Yellowstone from Kano, which is in northern Nigeria, it made me very happy. Because I just felt we need to collectively own this story. Not to pretend that everyone suffered the same, because that's not true, but to acknowledge that it's our story, that there's a sense in which all of us have to own it.
We'll have the last two questions. We'll start over there.
Thank you for coming. I'm a huge fan of your work, and thanks for the YouTube. I'm able to watch just about every lecture and interview that you give. So there was one that you gave in Sweden recently where you spoke about how, it was an interesting interview, but reading literature from Sri Lanka and how when you traveled to Sri Lanka, you felt that you had been there before. And I've never been to Nigeria, but because of your works, I have a make it to Nsukka. There's a part of me that would feel like I've been there. And then most recently, this week, the people at Kwani, they finally put up the videos from your lecture in Nairobi, where you spoke about the importance of literature to development and how literature and the arts allows people in Nigeria and elsewhere to really interrogate development in a different way. So I know that the way that your work is perceived within Nigeria and elsewhere is important to you, but also, especially with the attention that you're getting now, that telling Nigeria's story to people not in Nigeria is important. And my question is whether you feel that those two interests are competing with your focus right now, or whether you're able to balance both equally, and if they're competing, where you would rather put your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you should try and make it to Nsukka, by the way. It's worth visiting. But it's interesting because the question I would say, is there another option, which is none of the above, because that's what I would take. I don't think about audience when I write fiction. When I write non-fiction, it's an entirely different thing, but I don't do a lot of non-fiction. So when I write essays, for example, I have an audience in mind, I know what I'm doing, I'm very much aware of the self, all of those things. But with my fiction, which is really what I love, fiction is what I deeply love, I don't think about audience. And so because of that, and the reason I don't think about audience, and the reason I also, when I teach writing, I say to my students, do not think about audience when you write, because if you do, you're going to self-censor. You're going to censor yourself, you're going to silence yourself, sometimes without knowing it. Because if I thought about my father, for example, a man I adore, a lovely man, if I thought about my father in writing fiction, I could not write a sex scene. Because I would just be horrified thinking about my father reading the sex scene that I wrote. And so it's really important, and I think particularly for Africans, because our understanding of family is very deep and complex and layered and often extended. So I say to my students, don't think about your uncles, aunties, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law, just don't. And so because of that, my approach to my fiction is that I don't think about audience. And in many ways, when I was growing up, and I read all of these books from everywhere, I don't think that those Russian writers I read and loved spent a lot of time thinking about how they would be misunderstood by a Nigerian reader. Right? So I think people tell their stories, and so I'm often surprised sometimes by people who've connected to Half of the Yellow Sun. It genuinely surprises me sometimes. People from different parts of the world, and I think, really? And it's lovely, but then sometimes I'm just really surprised by it. And so no, for me, they're not interests that I need to balance or think about. I really do think that there is a selfish motivation for a fiction writer, which is that you're focused on your truth. And you hope that other people will be carried along by your truth, but then you're willing to accept it if they're not carried along by your truth.
The last question of you.
Hi, Chimamanda. Just wanted to say thank you for giving, definitely the Biafra War. A lot of us that grew up with that shadow of hearing before the war or during the war, those types of things, without really having any real idea of what happened. And even though, as you said, there is information out there, it's not readily accessible in the way that I think some of us would prefer, something kind of quick but meaningful. And if you wanted to kind of delve deeper, you can. And I guess this response to your last comment about not really having an audience in mind, but I feel that I definitely relate to, I feel that I've connected to, I guess what I'm trying to say is, you've given a voice to what I feel is my generation, or people that grew up part in Nigeria, part in America, whether it's you lived your entire life in Nigeria and then just came here, or you were born in Nigeria and then came here, or you've never been to Nigeria but had parents, that obviously have a lot of that culture around you still. And I think just creating that voice is very important. I mean, even in a place like this, in the DC area where there's a huge immigrant population, it's still a very individualized experience. And I think a lot of your stories help people to identify. So thank you.
Thank you. That makes me happy.
Nice closing thoughts. I think we're ending it perfectly. Any final thoughts? Or,
just to say that I hope people enjoyed the film as I did. I found it quite moving. So that the first time I saw it, even though I wrote the book, at some point I kept thinking, what's going to happen next? And then I remembered I wrote the novel. And I'd just like us to just appreciate the wonderful work of B. Bandele.
Very much. And she'll be signing books in the lobby, so there's a line when you get out. Please line up accordingly to buy the book and sign it. Thanks a lot for being here.